Are you somebody who has been on a spiritual path and you feel stuck? You feel like there's some pattern, a deep-seated trauma, some sort of block that you just can't move through? If you've been on the path for a while and you're beginning to feel like you're never going to be the person that you were meant to be, you're never going to be self-realized, enlightened, ascended, whatever the term is that you use. And are you beginning to feel like, I'm not sure if the spiritual path is for me any longer, or maybe there's just something really wrong with me that I can't get unstuck? If this resonates with you, if this sounds like you, then you're in the right place. And I'm going to start by just planting the seed of what I hope will be a very illuminating video for you about why you're stuck and how you can get unstuck. And that seed that I want to plant right now is this. If you feel that you are stuck on your spiritual journey, then the fundamental thing that you need to let go of is the idea that you're on a spiritual journey at all. Okay? I'm going to just let that sit, and I'll come back to that idea later on. So who am I and why are you listening to me? My name is Patrick Paul Garlinger. I am an author, a psychic, intuitive channel, whatever word resonates with you, somebody who has been on the path for a long time, over 15 years. And I, like you, had an incredible moment of awakening, began to see life differently, and then continued on the path for a while. And I have been very fortunate to have had some wonderful teachers who helped me to develop my body of knowledge, my understanding of spirituality, as well as my gifts, primarily my psychic gifts. By being on this path for a while, I've seen what happens for a lot of people, and myself included. And being stuck is very, very common. And I've worked with a lot of people as well who are also stuck. And what I've seen is that there is something that we all have in common, that everybody who's on the spiritual path goes through. So in this video, I'm going to explain what that is and how it can help relieve you. It is not necessarily the answer to everything. Very often you get online and you have a masterclass or see a webinar or some sort of offering that purports to be the solution that you need for every part of your life. And most of the time they don't live up to the hype. I'm not going to tell you that I've got the answer for everything in your life, but I do have an answer for why you might be feeling stuck. So what's the way forward? Let me give you one of the key takeaways already, which is that the mindset that you got when you woke up, the shift in consciousness that you had, is not the mindset or consciousness that can get you where you now need to go. Now, why is that? Let's start with what happens when we awaken. Your awakening may be very different from my awakening because there are lots of paths of awakening. So for some people, they may have, through meditation or mindfulness, discovered that their thoughts are creating their perception of reality and that their thoughts are not necessarily real and that they are continuously happening, and then you have this moment of clarity where you're like, oh, I'm not my thoughts, I'm awareness. Or you may have experimented with plant medicine or psychedelics and you had a kind of cosmic experience where your mind shifted and you began to receive lots of information and you felt a deep unity with the universe. Or perhaps you were working with an energy healer, some sort of guru, somebody who could manipulate energy in a way that allowed you to see that what you take to be you, your body and your five senses and your mind, is not all that there is to you, and that there are energetic aspects, we might call them chakras, and dimensions to you that, that you don't normally perceive. So these are three examples of different kinds of awakening. You may have had a different experience from any of those three. You may have had all three of those experiences. What matters is that when you have this experience, there is a shift. You suddenly have a moment where you see reality differently. The world seems to be opening up to you. You start to have answers and insights that you didn't have before, and your entire way of looking at the world has shifted. And this is exhilarating. It's really exciting. You feel alive. You're like, I've got answers. I'm going to heal this. There are things in my life that I want to be different, and now I feel like I have the tools or the insights that are going to allow that to happen. And then over time, what happens? That exhilaration wanes a bit. Excitement wears off. You're continuing to meditate. You're continuing to chant mantra or do forgiveness practices or do healing energetic work of some kind. You're going on retreats. you're taking ayahuasca, working with other kinds of plant medicine or other kinds of hallucinogens. And then life doesn't seem quite as exciting anymore. The novelty wears off, you continue for some months or for some years. You're on a path, but you've slowly begun to see that the things that you thought were going to go away or change are persisting. And you may have let go of certain parts of your life, you may have let go of people, you may have let go of jobs. Things change. This is all part of the path for many people as well, is that they wake up and they realize that they're people that they no longer really connect with, or they need to change their working situation. So all these things happen, these external shifts. And then some of the same patterns continue to emerge in your relationships, even though you're with spiritual people in a spiritual community, and you're like, well, this is my tribe. Why am I still having this? Or your financial situation and your work situation still hasn't improved. Or you're just going through the same sort of emotional triggers that you've had. Whatever it is, there are just these moments that start to accumulate where you feel like, I'm not where I'm supposed to be. I'm still not there. I still haven't arrived. I'm not enlightened, realized, transcendent, ascended, whatever the term is for you. And typically, what happens is that people either start dabbling, they start throwing everything at it, trying all sorts of techniques, new book, a new technique, a new meditation, a new healer, a new retreat. It's kind of like a smorgasbord, and you're kind of just throwing stuff at your blocks or limitations or patterns. Or seekers tend to sort of double down on what they're doing. They're like, I'm going to keep doing this, and I'm just going to, like, if I was meditating an hour a day, and I'm going to do 2 hours a day. I'm going to just do more retreats. I'm going to do more of this thing, which is a little bit of the version of the same. Which is like, I just need to do more. And over time, people get dejected. So I encounter in my work with people, when people come to me for readings, that there is this sense of like, well, I'm stuck. I'm just not there yet, and I don't know what the problem is. And sometimes that can lead to kind of disillusionment or a sense that there's something really wrong with you. You kind of internalize that as like a fatal flaw. I'm broken. I'm unfixable. I'm sort of beyond repair. My first message to you is that this is actually really normal. This is incredibly typical. I see it over and over and over again. And there is a way through it. There is a way forward. And I know this because I've been there. And in a nutshell, what this is that you have formed an identity around your awakening experience. It's what I call the awakened identity. It's the spiritual seeker who has gone through an awakening experience. And they formed an idea about who they are now and what it means to be on a spiritual path. And you are now in a mindset that compares yourself to what you were before, what you are now, and what you assume or hope will be you. And you're seeing the world through a linear framework of asleep, awake, and mastery. There was a period in your life that was you were asleep, unaware, you woke up, and now you should be making your way to mastery. And that mindset is very normal. It's very typical. But it's also the problem in terms of you feeling like you're blocked. Because when you woke up, you formed all sorts of beliefs about what the path is supposed to look like, what it means to be on a spiritual path or be a spiritual seeker, what it should end up looking like. Like, you should no longer feel any more pain. You should be feeling connected with everyone all the time, oneness. You should be having a completely abundant lifestyle because abundance is your birthright. And if your life isn't flowing in that way, the message sometimes seems to be, well, there's something wrong with you. All of these assumptions about who you are and what the path should look like are all part of your spiritual identity as a seeker. What I have been calling, will continue to call, the awakened identity. And this is an identity that is a story about a before and an after, asleep and awake, and then what is to come, enlightenment. And the thing is this identity is actually very similar to the identity you had before you were asleep. It may look different on the surface. It may be filled with all sorts of different ideas, but it's actually still structured in the same way. You're still trapped in a kind of linear mindset that's still seeing yourself in a before and after comparing model. You're seeing yourself as better than before, but inadequate or insufficient compared to what you could or should be. And this shows up in a bunch of ways, right? I see this all the time. Does this sound like you? You start to focus on raising your frequency all the time. You're constantly aware of whether your frequency is high or low, and there's a kind of hypervigilance that sets in, constantly trying to raise it. Almost a worry that you might be backsliding, you don't want to be feeling any negativity, you want to cut out all sorts of negativity from your life, and there's a worry, what do I need to do this to raise my frequency? Have I missed a portal? Have I missed this opportunity? The sense that you should be making progress and that there are all these sort of gates or portals or steps that you should be passing through, and that somehow you may not be making as much progress as you should be. This is the problem of spiritual bypass. And inevitably people fall into this trap of sort of making sure that they avoid all sorts of pain and negativity because it suggests that somehow they're not making progress, when in fact, in reality, they're still feeling this sort of negativity. Does this sound like you? It's another example of what happens is that people have patterns and things that they can't seem to heal, these blocks that keep coming up, contributing to feeling stuck. And your reaction to that block is to say, I'm not healing. There's a problem. There's a reason that I can't seem to heal this. This is a sign of failure. This is a mark of me being an inadequate spiritual seeker. And the sort of counterpoint, which kind of goes along with the first, is that sometimes the response to that is to just ignore and pretend that you've healed this, because it's really important to your sense of identity that this be something that you no longer are experiencing. Because as a spiritual seeker, my identity says, I shouldn't be experiencing this anymore. This should be healed. So you either see it as a sign that your identity is failing, this is a failure, like you're not living up to your identity because this isn't healed, or you pretend that it's healed to protect that identity. And now, does this sound like you? You have decided that there is only one way, or only a few techniques that truly work, and everything else is to be ignored. So you may decide that meditation is your one and only practice. You may decide that Reiki and healing is the thing that you have to turn to anytime something comes up. You may find that you want to work exclusively with plant medicine, and these other techniques or modalities don't have anything to offer you. And what I find when people are in that mindset is that they have built an identity around the mode by which they had an awakening experience, and the assumption is that is the only thing that they need to be working with. And so there's a rigidity there. You close yourself off from other spiritual practices, other modalities, other ways of looking at the spiritual path. And as a result, you sort of lock yourself into a certain kind of experience. And then that rigidity prevents you from moving on, because not every modality is going to work for everybody in the exact same way. And it may not be all that you need. So all three of these things are a reflection of a spiritual identity, the identity that you formed after your awakening experience. And there is a certain defensiveness or rigidity or protection around this identity, what the past should look like, what you should be doing. And you then close yourself off from other possibilities. And then when you experience what you see as a block, a pattern, an impediment, and you can't get around it, you're either avoiding it, you're seeing it as a sign of failure, or you're not working with the right tool to get at it. And so then it still becomes a symptom of your identity, that there's something wrong with you or wrong with the spiritual path, because your current identity actually can't get you past the block. As a result, the mindset that got you to where you are now, this awakened identity, that mindset is actually creating the problem that you're now trying to overcome. So it can't get you there. And part of that is an identity that says there is a true self, and I am making my way there in a very linear way. I was this, I'm now this, and I will be this thing. And the way to get there is through this particular technique or set of techniques, and this is what it will look like. And that identity sees itself as a sleep-awakened mastery. You are the way you were, you had an identity, you have a new identity as a spiritual seeker, and you will eventually grow into this other, this enlightened person through specific techniques. What you have is a story of before and after, asleep and awake. And now this new chapter in the story is I'm awake but frustrated. And you keep building this story based on this identity of what you think the past should be. And that story is still filled with judgment. Right? Your before was a lesser version of you. This current awakened you is a much better version. And this future you, this enlightened you, is the best one of all. And so you're better than you were in the past, but you're inadequate compared to this future self. And you think that all that needs to happen is that the former version of you that's still around is what needs to be gotten rid of. You're still just getting rid of all this old stuff and becoming this new stuff. And so the stuff that's still hanging out, you need to get rid of, right? These are your blocks, your patterns, your limiting beliefs. And to some degree that's true. But the reality is that identity that you have now and what this process looks like is a vestige of your prior self and is the identity that's actually in the way. That's a story of comparison, a story rooted in time and identity. And a story that says the spiritual path is one of feeling less emotionally volatile. I feel less pain. My life is more abundant. Who said that that was what the spiritual path was meant to look like? You might be saying, well, of course it is. Why else would it be? I mean, what's the point of doing that? The point being is you have an identity around what it should look like, and you have a set of expectations about what it would look like. And your sense of self is now being measured against that. That is what it means to have an identity as a spiritual seeker. Either you're doing things correctly and you're on the right path and you're making progress, so your identity as the spiritual seeker is affirmed, or these are indications of failure. So you're either protecting your identity, bolstering your identity, or your identity comes into question. You're challenged. This is why these things feel bad, or there's indications that your vibration's falling, or that you're not doing enough work, or that there's actually something wrong with you. This sense of identity is either challenged and in need of defense, or bolstered and being strengthened, is the mindset now that we have to look at. So as I said earlier, I planted the seed that the mindset that you got when you woke up is the mindset that's not going to get you to where you want to go. And I also said earlier that the idea of arriving, that you're even on the spiritual path, is part of what you need to let go of. Now we can start talking about what would it mean to let go of your identity as a spiritual seeker, to let go of this awakened identity, to let go of destination, of arrival, of reaching the end point. What would that even mean? You may have heard the expression, the obstacle is the way, as a kind of spiritual insight or piece of wisdom. And often that's taken to mean that's what you need to face. Whatever obstacle, that's where life is leading you. And that is true. The obstacle is the way is also an indication that where you see an obstacle, the very fact that you see an obstacle is what you need to let go of. So you can begin to see, I'm already pointing to, the reason that you're not at your destination is because you look at this as a path. And the reason that you're not arriving and you're not there and you're comparing stuff is you're seeing this as a journey with a beginning, a middle point, and an end point. And your identity is tied to this notion that that's what the path is. That's what spirituality is. So letting go of all of that, which I'm not saying is easy, is the way forward. That is the obstacle. The obstacle is this entire framework of a spiritual journey. So I'm going to challenge you right now. I'm going to challenge you. What if you were to just accept yourself, just as you are? That this is it. You are who you are right now. Let it go of any desire for change, for being better, for getting somewhere. Now, some of you might feel like I'm calling for acquiescence. I'm asking you to give up. Some people will hear that. They're like, oh, really? I'm just supposed to let go and drop everything and not even bother? And I'm not saying that. I'm not suggesting that you abandon the work. But what if you were to let go of any idea whatsoever of who you become as a result of this? What if instead of comparing yourself to who you were, who you might be, and worrying about raising your vibration, you just saw yourself as you are right now and accepted it? Because what happens when you do that is something almost paradoxical and also quite magical, which is that suddenly everything shifts. Change happens without demanding change. You suddenly find that by not looking to arrive and by giving up any sense of destination, you find that you're exactly where you were meant to be. And if all of that sounds paradoxical, it is. It's meant to. It's not about acquiescence. It's not about giving up. It's not about putting down all the tools and saying, nothing will ever be different. It's also not about getting anywhere. One of the reasons for this kind of identity issue is that we have received a lot of mythic stories around enlightenment. The story of the Buddha, the story of Jesus, these are built on a before and after, these sort of conversion events. The Buddha under the Bodhi tree, Jesus Christ and the crucifixion and then the resurrection. We get these as stories of a before and an after and a mastery. Both of them are now fully realized. And so we take on this kind of narrative for ourselves, again, a kind of identity of before, after, and then what mastery might look like. And for some of you, that outcome, that final destination might be selflessness, egolessness. And for others of you, you might be thinking of it as sort of the true, authentic version of you, completely perfected in every way. And for still others, you might say, those are both the same thing. It doesn't really matter what your destination is, because the awakened identity that you have now can't get you to either one. The ego cannot get you to egolessness. The wounded self cannot get you to this idealized, perfected version of yourself. And for many people, what happens as part of this attachment to their identity is that they masquerade. They masquerade as being perfected in some way. And then we get all sorts of examples of stories of gurus and teachers who had behind the scenes engaged in all sorts of horrific mental, emotional, physical, sexual abuse of people. And even on a lesser note, it doesn't have to rise to the level of abuse, but there is a need to sort of bolster the image of the teacher or supposedly enlightened one, avoiding all sorts of stories of when they were basically acting in very human ways. So here's the paradox around identity, this whole thing that I've been describing for you. Because it may sound I'm saying, let's just throw identity out the window. We're just going to get rid of all identity altogether. And that would just be the claim of being selfless. And I'm certainly not claiming that our goal is to be this sort of perfected, idealized version of ourselves, which I don't even know what that looks like. What I am suggesting is a paradox that we are not our identities, and we cannot not have identities. We have to accept that we have a partial, limited, constructed, constantly in flux, trying to be whole identity, sense of self. And we are never completely and fully that. We have labels for ourselves. Those labels do not capture fully who we are. Even our efforts to capture that in language, you might say, I'm an ego and a body, and I'm also a soul. I would agree with that statement. Does the word soul capture all of who you are? Does it fully encompass everything that you can be? Probably not. You may have experiences of bliss, mystical unity experiences. You may have experiences of emptiness, of being nobody, and thus everything all at once. And you will come back to being a self with a name, a sense of identity, a sense of history, of time, and then you're going to flow back into these moments, and then you're going to come back to a sense of self. You are an identity, and you are not an identity, and both are true. You will always have a sense of self, and there is no self, no sense of self that fully captures all of who you are. Both are true simultaneously. Does that mean you never change? No, of course not. Does that mean you know what you'll look like at the end of the journey? Of course not. The person who bypasses feels threatened by the experience of negativity. The spiritual seeker who judges others for not being awakened, why doesn't everybody wake up? The whole world would be better. Feels threatened by the unawakened. And so they fall back into judgment. The first is self-judgment. The bypasser is judging themselves. The spiritual person is judging others, all to defend this identity. But comes with it a sense of being stuck. I'm stuck, I'm not better, the world's not better. So when we embrace paradox, we start to loosen our grip on stories and identity and time. This idea of a before, after, and then an evolution to mastery. And when we do that, when we just accept who we are right now without comparing ourselves to the past or to the future, and we allow ourselves to be, something begins to shift on its own. It starts to feel more loving. A different sense of yourself can emerge without you trying to get there. And often when that happens, the things that we saw as blocks or patterns or limitations or limiting beliefs, whatever it is that you identify now as the reason for being stuck, they begin to dissolve on their own. And that's when you can hold that paradox that says, I'm still healing and I'm also whole. I'm human and I'm divine. These do not actually contradict each other. And you recognize that you are always going to be forming some sense of an identity, and at the same time that that identity is not you, and you can also accept that you have one as you let it go. You all hold it all much more lightly. There's far less of a grip and a vigilance than most people who are feeling stuck have. You're fine just as you are, and you'll be different in the future. Maybe even better. Maybe not. That question almost doesn't even matter. That notion doesn't matter anymore. You'll just be who you will be in the future. So now you can understand why this is an acquiescence. You're not putting down all your tools, you're not giving up. You're saying, I'm walking this path, and this is not a path. There is no destination. There is no arriving. There's no endpoint. I'm just taking a step forward. So you can't not walk the path, and there is no path. That's the paradox. That is just a taste of what the spiritual path starts to look like when you let go of the awakened identity and let go of this linear, time-based consciousness of the story of what it's supposed to look like. So I'm going to invite you now to two different opportunities. One, if you would like to explore this on your own, much more deeply, in a way that allows you to move at your own pace, I'm going to invite you to take a look at my book, Endless Awakening, Time, Paradox, and the Path to Enlightenment. In this book, I go through many more paradoxes, and I look at how this relates to emotions, the body, your sense of awareness of time, relationships, fear of the future, trusting your intuition, death, topics at the core of what it means to be human. You can get it on Amazon, it's $20, and it will take you through a series of reflections. It'll offer you tips and practices, and you can see the spiritual path looks very different from the perspective of paradox. If you'd like to go even deeper, I'm going to invite you to explore a program with me that I'm going to be leading a group of people on. It's 8 weeks, and in those 8 weeks, we're going to cover a lot that is covered in the book and a lot more. We're going to go on a journey together that has no end. Can you go on a journey with me and not have a destination? Can you see where you end up without a goal, without a sense of the path having an outcome, of getting somewhere, of being different? And yet, you will be different at the end of those 8 weeks. Spend 8 weeks with me and see if your whole outlook doesn't shift. Thank you for listening. If nothing else, I hope that the insights that you got from today's video have helped you in some way, and I hope to see you in the 8-week journey. Take care. Bye-bye.